Alrighty then. It's the wee hours of Monday morning, and it's time to show up. I'm showing up. I'm glad you showed up. I appreciate every single one of you. And let's get into probably the most important part of anatomy that people don't really talk about. I mean, they do. It gets talked about, but it doesn't get as much as attention as it ought to get. And what I'm talking about is the torso. Because there's this fundamental reality of the human body, which let me go ahead and switch over to the. I drew a foot. This week. I think I did a pretty good job on the foot. But yeah, that's not what I'm going to talk. I'm not talking about feet. There's plenty of stuff out there talking about feet. I think I did a pretty good job on this foot. And I don't really spend a lot of time doing feet, and I should spend more time doing feet. But what I want to talk about is the torso, and specifically about the joints of the body. I don't think enough energy and effort are dedicated to the joints. So first of all, let's close that. I don't save anything. I haven't done anything meaningful on it. I just opened up the program and there was the foot, and I think I changed the active layer or something, just as a matter of being in the middle of doing stuff. But see, here's the thing. If we just start with a very basic kind of stick figure, okay? If we start with just, let's do this in black. If we just start with a stick figure of sorts, okay? We're going to do kind of the pelvis there, and we're going to do, there's the arm hanging down here, here's the elbow, and here's the wrist, and here's there's the hand. We're going to do the same thing over here. Here's the shoulder. Well, more accurately, here is the shoulder. And then we got our legs right here. I got knees. Got calves. We got feet, of course. So this is roughly proportions of the human body. And here's how everything fits together. And I have done something that I do over and over because I'm an idiot. I have forgotten that people have necks. So here's our human body, okay? And the thing that I specifically want to go over here as I want to go, there are joints in the human body. There are areas of the human body that move, and there are areas of the human body that don't. Okay? Now, your bones, people don't talk about this as much as they should, but your bones are the same length all the time. If you were to lift your elbow up away from your body, it would have to stay the same distance from your shoulder, because that bone doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't change size. It doesn't change length. So you can lift it up a certain amount, but that elbow is going to be the same distance from the shoulder no matter what. Now, your shoulder can be lifted up because your shoulder is actually jointed right here. And that collarbone could come up as you lift your shoulder. So your shoulder can be lifted up. And when your shoulder lifts up, well, your elbow lifts up too. But then your elbow could still only go in that same kind of circular trajectory. So you have this sort of perspective ellipse around the shoulder. And that defines a sort of three-dimensional area that your elbow can exist in. It has to exist in that area. It can't exist much of anywhere else. If you try to lift your elbow up and push it as far to the side as you can't go much past the center line of your body. You might be able to get an inch or two, but you really have to strain, and you can't really hold it there easily. You can put your whole arm all the way across the center line, but that elbow doesn't go much past your nose. So what this kind of means is that when you put your elbow over here, and you got your hand going all the way across, when you do this, you have your shoulder here, and you have kind of that diamond-shaped tunnel that your neck goes into. So your head's right here. You can put your elbow about right here, but it's not that far in front of your face. And then you've got your forearm comes across, and if you were to put your hand on your opposite shoulder like this, you'll notice that right here, you create a triangle. This happens with your arm no matter what you do, okay? So you've got kind of, here's your arm, here's the elbow, here's the shoulder, and these two parts are about the same length. No matter how you bend your elbow, you're going to end up with an isosceles triangle. These two legs, the upper arm and the lower arm, are going to be about the same length, and they're going to make this little triangle. So wherever your wrist is, if you say, I want my hand to be here, okay? If you want your hand to be there, if you draw a line to the shoulder, then right in the middle of that line, that's where your elbow has to be. It has to fit somewhere in that space, because that's going to be a little isosceles triangle. You can lever this upward. You can move that up, but it's going to stay right along that line, right along that middle of that line. And there are some very awkward positions that you could try to put it in, but it's not really going to go there. Where you put your hand is basically going to dictate where the rest of the arm has to be. The rest of the arm has to be in a position where you've got enough room for the upper arm and enough room for the lower arm, and they're about equal. So no matter how you orient that, if you lift this elbow up, then the hand has to move. It can't stay where it is if you lift the elbow upward, okay? And you find this with all kinds of stuff. It's the same thing with your knee. If you lift your leg, okay, there's that hip joint. Your knee has to move along a perspective ellipse with that hip joint, and that's going to dictate where your calf is. And once you've dictated where the calf is, you've also dictated where the foot has to be. You do not have a lot of options. If you put your foot somewhere, if you say, okay, my foot's going to be here, all right, we'll put it here in my white suit. Okay, if your foot's here, you draw a line up here, then you can project that outward, and you could say, okay, well, my knee has to be here, so my calf can be here. And you may have to rotate that foot to get it into the right place. Now, one of the things that I have trouble with all the time is you've got a character standing somewhere, and that character's foot placement has got to give them a solid standing basis. And you've got to have a sort of a solid grounding, a solid foundation. I'm not very good at that. I'm not very good at placing my characters in 3D space and having them look like they're actually standing in the 3D space and not just like floating in the air somewhere. A lot of people have trouble with that. A lot of people have issues with that. I'm not alone. It's a common problem. It's a problem lots and lots of people have. It still really fucking annoys me. But when you place your feet, that dictates where your legs have to be. You can alter where that leg is, but that's going to alter where the knee is. And altering where the knee is going to alter where the thigh is. And it's going to alter the way that your character is standing. It's going to alter the way that it's going to alter the way that their stance fits into the environment. And if you're drawing any kind of active characters or you're trying to do any kind of dynamic work, then it's very important to have that stance feel solid and like your character is actually standing where they're standing. And that's a place that they could stand. If you're doing any kind of work where your character needs to be moving, your character needs to be heading in a particular direction, something like that, then you have to be able to draw these poses where they're moving, and it actually looks like they're going somewhere and doing something. Sometimes people talk about poses looking stiff. I don't know what that means. I don't know what it means for a pose to look stiff. So I don't know whether my poses look stiff or not. I've always thought that, you know, because I don't look at a pose and think it looks stiff, that I don't have that problem. But maybe I just don't know what it looks like. I don't know. But there's a weight line that runs through your character. And you have to think about what weight is where, and your weight's going to sit over top of one part of the stance. And you've got kind of a balance. You can straighten this character up a little bit, and you can put more weight on the back foot, but you couldn't really have them leaning back like this. That would look wrong. That's not the way that they'd stand if they were leaning back. Maybe had their hands in a different place. It would look strained. It would just look funky. That doesn't look like a way a person would stand. If they're standing like this, the whole body needs to lean back. This pelvis needs to shift backwards. This leg needs to be more bent. And this one needs to be more pressed out, because you want that weight of the center torso. You want that weight of the center torso more or less centered over this area here, so it's supported. I don't know if I've done a good job explaining that. But we've got all of these areas of the human body that are rigid. There are no joints in your head. Your head doesn't change shape. There are no sinuous prehensile movements of the upper arm or the lower arm, although there are two bones, and the bones do like crisscross over one another as you rotate your arm. I haven't really gone over that. I've gone over that in a past video, but I haven't done that in a long time. And your hips are kind of, they're kind of just a bowl. And all your guts sit in there, because up here in the top part, you got your lungs and you got your heart, and you've got the sternum, which is a solid plate that sits over your heart to protect it. And then you've got the rib cage, which is made of these slats. And the reason it's made of these kind of slats is so when you take a deep breath, your rib cage can expand. It's so these ribs at these little cartilaginous joints at the breastbone, they can stretch and flex, and they can move apart from each other on the sides, and they can flex outward and inward. And you can expand your lungs and contract your lungs. But this part of the skeleton is rigid. There's a bunch of muscle up here. There's your shoulder blade there, your shoulder blade there, and there's the clavicles that come across here. And those provide the structure there. Other than that, it's just the pec muscles. And you've got all of this muscle outside of this. But that internal rib cage, that doesn't flex. You can't really crunch your side in. All of the crunching happens in this area. This center area here is squishy. Your rib cage and your pelvis are always the same distance apart in the back, because your rib cage kind of sits like this, and your pelvis kind of sits like this, and the spine connects them. And this bit right here, that's always the same length. You can flex the rib cage forward, and you can crunch the stomach inward. So you can flex forward like this, but that spinal column is not going to get any shorter. You're going to crunch all of this stuff in the front, and that's going to kind of pooch out, but you're not going to make your rib cage any shorter. And you're not going to get it any closer to the pelvis in any meaningful sense. You can get it closer in the front by crunching in all of this stuff on the inside. But the back is always going to stay the same distance apart. It's the same thing with your head. You can lower your chin. You can't lower the back of your head. You can tilt your chin up and expose more of your throat, but there's no way for you to make your throat smaller. You can hunch your shoulders up to make it look like it's smaller, but that's just moving your shoulders upward. That doesn't actually make the neck any shorter. That doesn't actually compress these bones, because bones don't compress. That's why proportions are important. That's why understanding the proportions of the human body matters. And your elbows are roughly even with the bottom of your rib cage. Okay? Your shoulders are pretty even with the top of your rib cage, right here. And your elbows are even with the bottom of your rib cage. So they move in this kind of circle. Starting from the bottom of your rib cage. And that's pretty much where they have to be. If you're going to reach inward, they're going to lever upward like this. So you've got this kind of area that your elbow can conceivably occupy. And if it's going to move outside of this, you got to move your shoulder. But that's the distance that it has to stay from the shoulder. The only way for your elbow to go any place that's outside of this circle is for your shoulder to move. And that shoulder's at the top of the rib cage, elbows at the bottom of the rib cage. That's important. Just like you've got this space from the shoulder to the chin, that space from the shoulder to the chin, the neck is always going to be about the same length, back to the back of the skull. When you're looking at the head from the side, okay, there's another thing hardly anybody ever talks about. Your jaw opens downward. Always downward. Your top jaw doesn't move. It stays attached to the head. There's no joint in there. The joint is here. Only the bottom jaw actually moves. I don't know if I'm doing a good job explaining any of this, but this is stuff that's important. It's like there are three fundamentals of art. There's perspective. There's lighting. And there's composition. That's it. Perspective is understanding how to make objects look like they exist in three-dimensional space. Lighting is how to make them look like they're real objects that are lit by real light. And composition is about putting multiple objects together and having them look like they fit together in the space. Perspective can be divided into line, shape, and form. Just like lighting can be divided into value, color, and texture. And you can work on all of these individually. They kind of shade into one another, and they begin to affect one another bit by bit. And then with composition, you've got flow. A lot of people, anatomy is composition. So you've got flow, which is the same as like your gesture drawing. You've got construction. Which is anatomy. And finally, you have layering or drapery, which is objects on top of other objects and how they behave when they have something underneath of them. And usually people approach that when they're trying to make a human body look like it has clothing on it, or a table look like it has a tablecloth on it, or a curtain look like it's actually a curtain hanging from a curtain rod. But all of that is basically composition. So what we're working on here is kind of construction. Construction is just what are the pieces, parts that a thing is made out of. It's like if you have a box, if you have a basic box, okay, that's a simple form. But you can have a more complex form, and there are three main types of forms. There's the ball, the barrel, and the box. And representing those so they look right in 3D space is what perspective is all about. But once you can make one of these simple forms look like it exists in 3D space, you have construction. And one of the things with the ball is that eventually you learn how to work with an ovoid, which is just a ball that's narrow at one end. Then you've got the cone. The cone is just a cylinder that's narrow at one end. The pyramid is just a box that's narrow at one end. And all of those things just automatically flow out of the ball, the barrel, and the box. And then you start working with complex concepts like a cylinder that is wide at one end gets narrow in the middle, and then gets wide again. And that's a shape that you'll tend to see fairly frequently. You'll have a cylinder that turns into a box as it moves forward. This is, in fact, what your wrist does. If you look at your wrist is kind of square, okay? Your elbow is also kind of square, but in the middle, it's round. So you have a box to a barrel to a box. And learning to compose those things together and to put them together, and you look at all the complex muscles of the body, and you've got, for example, the rectus femoris up here. That's this big honking muscle you can see, and the tendon that runs down into the knee. That is fundamentally an ovoid shape that is cut off. It's like a big long egg, but instead of being a full egg all the way down, it's chopped off part way down. So you only get part of it and not the whole thing. I'm doing a bad job of illustrating all of this stuff. I should be using multiple layers, and I'm not. Because I'm dumb. I'm stupid and I make bad decisions. We all are, that's fine. We're all dumb, we all make bad decisions. That is the nature of life. But all of these fundamentals, you work on all of these just as a matter of course, just in the process of doing stuff. And when I talk about line, shape, and form, line is when you go, okay, here's the edge of an object right here. That's where the edge of this object is. That's where this object starts and some other object begins. When you talk about shape, you're saying, well, the inside of that object has an existence. That object exists in three-dimensional space, and it has a specific shape, and it has a value or a color or a texture. And identifying the shape of that, this is kind of the difference between drawing and painting. When you're working with a pencil, you're identifying the edges of your objects, okay? But when you work with a paintbrush, you're identifying the shapes of similar objects. And then you get into form. And when you get into form, that's when you start getting into things like, okay, now this right here, we've got a front plane and also a side plane. We've got a plane that more light is falling on. And to identify the form of this, we identify these different planes. And you don't necessarily have to get the values correct on this to understand that you're representing the form. Making the edges look like you have a three-dimensional shape is one way to define form, but making the shape look like you have a three-dimensional shape is another one. You could just fill this whole thing in, and it's just a shape, but you've also indicated the form. You can still imagine the cube in that, even though you don't have any actual value or lighting. But you can easily add it. You can easily say, well, you know, the side is going to be a little bit darker over here. And then the front is going to be even darker. And you can use the value of that You can use the different values of green to indicate that, or you can use an actual color to represent that it's made of something in particular. Like you could take a sort of brownish color like this. And if we come over here to the flat color layer, we can, well, not going to do much of anything unless I move it up over top of the other layers. And you can say, well, here's the color of the wood right here, and it's a little bit lighter here. Now, I've talked to people about value and color before. When you're making a color lighter, you don't just want to increase the brightness of the color. You also want to reduce the saturation, and you want to shift the hue into a warmer direction. So you're going to make that brighter by doing that. And if you're going to make it cooler, well, you're going to do the opposite. If we start from that same color, if we go, okay, we want it to be a bit more of a, we want it to be a bit darker, you don't just reduce the value, you also increase the saturation, and you make it cooler. And it's fairly formulaic when you first start out, and you develop a feel for it over time. But you can see the difference in how that fits together. And then you can move on from the color, and you could say, okay, from here, what I can do is I can, let's go ahead and move this deck back down here. I'll go into raster, and I'll go into the shading layer right here. Let's turn off the notes layer so we can see it. If we come over here to the shading layer, which is on a multiply mode, we can grab that same color, and we can do some little simulated wood grain running down along it. Is going on there? What? There we go. I didn't have it in the appropriate folder. So you take a very narrow brush and you just go, okay, let's add some wood grain here. Just a very simple sort of wood grain. And then we can do the same over here on the front. And we can say, okay, let's add some wood grain on that. And we can give it a texture that makes it feel like it's an actual physical texture. And then we can be all slick and we can go, well, the texture of the end of a piece of wood, well, it's circular, not and it's got a couple of kind of little radial bits to it. But now you've got something that reads at a distance as kind of being a piece of wood. I haven't done a very good job on it because I'm not very good at doing this, but you put the value and the color and the texture, turn the notes back on, you put that value and that color and that texture together, select the appropriate layer and delete it. You put that value and that color and that texture together, and they produce an effect that can fool the observer into thinking they're looking at a physical object instead of just at some colors on a screen. Because fundamentally, that's all it is. When you really zoom in on it, it's just little dots of color on a screen. And you can easily trick the eye because you can arrange those dots in any configuration, and you can make anything you want people to see there, which is just fucking amazing. It's magical. I love it. I wish I was better at it. We all wish we were better at it. That's natural. That's normal. But I don't know. I mean, I've kind of wandered off the subject here, but yeah, you need to be aware of where your joints are and where your bones are, because bones don't bend. They only bend at joints. You need to be aware of what parts of the human body are rigid and do not flex and do not bend, and what parts of the human body are very flexible and bend and flex and twist in all kinds of different ways. And then you relate all of that to the environment. That's the thing that it's one of the things. There was a model I used to follow on Facebook, Tish Fee, and she always did these photo shoots, and what I loved about her photo shoots was that she was never just in a space. She was always interacting with it. She was always leaning against something. She was always making a part of that environment something that was necessary to the pose that she was doing and the shot that she was doing. And it integrated the setting with the pose in a way that I just thought was really, really well done. And I don't know how much of that was her and how much was the photographer, but it doesn't actually matter, because as an artist, you're both the photographer and the model when you're drawing from imagination or painting from imagination. So when you come up with a character and you come up with a background, that character and that background should interact in a way that they feel like they're in the same place. That is a difficult thing for me. That is something that I work on, but I never feel like I do a particularly good job of. I don't feel like I do a particularly good job of representing environments in the first place, to be honest, but I do try. I do try to represent them, which is more than a lot of people do. And that's one of the reasons it takes me so long to get even moderately good at anything. Because instead of working on one particular thing, I'm working on 50 different things. I'm trying to do landscapes, and I'm trying to do architecture, and I'm trying to do trees, and I'm trying to do meadows, and I'm trying to do skies and clouds and weather and water, and I'm trying to represent the sea, and I'm trying to represent the river, and I'm trying to represent a cobblestone road. And then I got people, and I got animals, and I got everybody's trying to interact with the environment, and then there's vehicles, and there's all of this stuff that I'm trying to learn to do all at once. And that's necessarily going to slow down a lot of it. I have started to consider the fact, and this frustrates me because I don't want to do this. I've started to consider that in order to get all of my stuff done for the game that I'm working on, in order to get all of the graphics done, I may not have any choice but to 3D model them. I'm not happy with that. I don't I don't really like that idea. But I'm looking at it and I'm going, I can paint over the assets that I've got, or I can 3D model them, or I can buy additional assets. And I don't know. I just don't know how I'm going to do all of these thousands of assets that I need in anything remotely approaching a reasonable time frame. And maybe I just don't get to do it in a reasonable time frame. That's another thing. Maybe it takes 3 years. That might be okay, given the way that I want to build it, given the way that I want to do it. I mean, I've got some 3D modeling chops, but I haven't used Blender since like version 2.1, and now I think we're on like version 4.8 or some such shit. Well, it's not 4.8. It's what version is it? Let me check. Where's Blender? 4.2, I think. Yeah. 4.2 is the current one. Well, there's a 4.5 candidate, but I'm using the 4.2 stable long-term support. Not that it matters. I haven't really opened it and done anything with it. I just kind of keep it updated, just so I have it. There's so much work to do on this thing. I really do, and I need to organize it, and I need to work on it, and I need to get it done. I got so much work that needs to be done on the music and the sound effects, and I got to refactor a bunch of stuff. And I'm procrastinating on that. I'm gonna be doing it at the beginning of November, which is a whole month away. And in the meantime, I'm kind of looking at it's next week. I think next week or the week after is the one where I move Old Man Yapping from Thursdays to Wednesdays. And that's going to be, I do a video on Monday, I do a video on Wednesday, and then I don't do anything Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And that 4-day gap, that's gonna feel rough. Because that's a long time. And I'm going to be doing that for a whole month before I finally get around to flipping the switch on everything and doing the new playlists and doing the new season, as I call it. Man, I am closing up on 5 years of this shit. That is a long time, and I've still only got like 400 subscribers. Because my videos are kind of shit. I mean, look at this. Here I am just kind of rambling with no particular point after a quote-unquote lesson that may not have helped anybody with anything in any way. I need to improve that. I think flipping Old Man Yapping into music stuff is going to give me an opportunity to, I understand music theory, I understand composition, I understand melody and rhythm and arrangement. So I'll have something that I actually know about that I could talk about. Sound design is a thing that I know and I could talk about. So that middle of the week video, starting in November, 2 out of the 3 videos I do every week are going to be something where I actually know what I'm doing and can feel like what I say is worth somebody listening. And that's going to be nice. I understand music. I understand code. Those are things that I know. Art, Not so much. 7 years I've been working on this art thing, and I'm still just not as good as a, not quite 7, almost 7. But I think on some level it matters that I started something in my late 40s and early 50s. That's important. I don't know. I don't think anything I say at this point is particularly meaningful or useful, so I'm gonna go ahead and call it. I hope some of what I said is useful. Do a little YouTube dance, like, comment, subscribe, all that happy horse shit. Yeah, okay, bye.